And welcome back to episode 19 of Who's on Top. I'm your host, Ori, and this week we're going to be talking about robots, artificial intelligence, and a little bit of sports. How could all these three things be connected, you might ask? Well, actually, funny story. Our very own fencing captain, Jeremy Giles, has had a stabbing accident during one of these virtual bouts and has had his arm reconstructed with aluminum fiber and optical nerve fibers using his new 5G network.
I just
However, he
would
said
like to
he's not
add,
comfortable talking about this. Right, Jeremy?
actually, I'd like to add that my new arm is jacked, but I appreciate that your opinion.
I'm sure it was jacked as well before.
Sure.
But since he's not comfortable talking about this, instead we're going to be discussing the automated strike zone and debating its utility in the MLB and minor leagues. We also have a special guest, so we're going to be introducing after the three regulars. But let's go with the three regulars first. Just waking up from his slumber after going to bed at 4 a.m., we have the pro gamer and sports encyclopedia, Jacob Kazin.
What's up, guys?
Finding new ways to use his bionic arm every day, we got the fencing captain, Jeremy Giles.
At your service.
And losing at poker last night for the first time in 10 years, we got the Russian machine, Ellis Gordon.
What's up, guys?
Hey, Ellis, who beat you last night?
Well, you might have won, but I'm 19 wins to your 3. We just
Wait, I
won
beat him
again.
last time we played.
No, I beat him last time.
No, 2 times ago.
And Jacob, before we get to the chitter chatter, we want to introduce our venerable guest, the very own prodigious storyteller, Daniel Fox.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, Daniel, do you want to talk about your new works of fiction? I've been hearing they're accreting some critical acclaim.
Yeah, the New York Times called it definitely a story. Yeah, it's Hunger Games 3, Mocking John. It's supposed to be coming out sometime in mid-June. Going through the editors. Basically just a story about war, love, and peace, and a really old teacher.
Sounds super exciting. We're going to be attaching a link to the description at the end of the episode. Okay, but let's get down to the automated strike zone. I know we all have very strong feelings about this, including Ellis's disregard for automation since he lived in Soviet Russia, and Jacob's love of technology since he loves Fortnite so much. But I wanted to start with our very own guest, Daniel Fox. What do you think about the automated strike zone? I want to kind of go around and gauge everyone's opinions about this.
Yeah, so, and they first started talking about introducing the automated strike zone. I was very against it for a number of reasons. What I enjoy about baseball, and there's a lot of people who, a lot of casual fans who don't really understand the intricacy of baseball, is the little games inside the real game. And that a large part of that is catcher framing and stealing strikes. It's something that you might not realize. You don't really understand the game, how big a role the catcher has in framing. You could argue that catcher is the most important defensive position in sports, and framing is a huge part of that. How do you steal strikes for your pitcher, or do you turn strikes into balls by presenting the ball to the umpire? With an automated strike zone, you're taking out a huge part of the catcher's role. And one more point is that we don't really give credit to how good umpires are. We get on them all the time for bad calls. Even when the call's missed by an inch, we get on. But when they make a really good call, we never give them any credit. Umpires are so good in this game, and it is so hard and their job is so hard that it would be stupid to just take their job away just because they miss a borderline call every once in a while.
So I guess I have two kind of takes on this. I do kind of agree that it will take jobs away from the umpires and that they don't get a lot of the credit they deserve. Like, you think about it, look at the exact inch a small ball hurtling at almost 100 miles per hour on every pitch is going, and to see that to the exact inch is an incredibly hard job. I agree. But in society, as time goes on, you see with technology, more and more jobs are being taken away. And I guess it's just right. Yes, it's not so much as to penalize them for the inch call they're missing, it's that with technology, we can have perfection, or essentially perfection. So why would we, and we can still have the umpires in the game, they can still make the call, even if they're not actually deciding it. So I understand the point, but I guess it's just, why would you not go to a system where it's more accurate? even
think-
if it is just a little bit so.
I think part of the attraction with baseball, though, and all sports in general, is the human error involved in these sports. It's the fact that if everything's so automated, then like it becomes almost like a robot league, very slowly
But
but
Ellis,
surely.
how do you
but-
respond to like instant replay, for example, in the NFL? Is that not improving the game to some capacity?
It
And I
definitely improves the game, but look at also all the controversy. It's called the catch or not a catch. A part of what makes sports so lovable and infuriating is the human error involved in it, and I think that human error is an essential part to the game that can't be
Oh.
taken. Also, I want
If
to
I
echo
could-
Fox's point when he said it's a part of the game. The framing is like a big part of the game, of the fact that catchers have to
If
frame pitches, and that completely loses value once you have automated strike zone.
if I could say something, human
And-
error is very important, but human error of the players, not human error of the rules, right? Like you never want, like I speak this both from as a player, from having played sports and watching sports, you never want a game to be decided by a bad ref, by a ref that calls something as a strike that isn't a strike, or an umpire in this case.
Yeah,
right?
I agree. I
Like,
think when refs do a good job, they're not noticed.
Yeah.
This
So-
goes in soccer. This goes in basketball is a little bit different because the fouls are different. But I think
but most
the
of the time they
primary
do a
job
good
of a ref isn't to
Yeah.
interfere with the game, but to act as a mediator between the game and the players. So if we can make that have no error, such as the strike zone, I don't see why not.
And of course,
All right, let me just ask you this. In a basketball game, is there a review every time a guy drives to the basket and to see if there's a foul? No. Does it mean the officials sometimes will miss a call? Yeah, but we gotta trust our officials because they're great at what they do.
but I think there's one thing you're missing there, and that's time. Like I think this is the big problem with like instant replay in the NFL, and sometimes with fouls in basketball, is that takes a lot of the time out of the game, right? So oftentimes you'll see not so many fouls called in a basketball game because you want to let the players play the game, you want to let the game continue. A foul could take 5 minutes or more to make the call, versus this, which with an automated strike zone, it won't take any more time, right? So it essentially makes the game more fair without taking time and making it harder to watch.
I kind of wanted to. We're all talking about the automated strike zone, like we know what it is. But do you guys want to get into the for our audience? I want to kind of get into the specifics of what that would really entail. Like, how would the umpires interact with it? Is it how big of a difference would it change by player? Jacob, do you kind of want to break it down for us?
I mean, from what I know, there's basically the umpires are still going to be on the field, all 5 or however many there are in the field. Not sure exactly. Daniel, 5?
Or
4, okay. However many umpires there are, they're all still going to be on the field. But the home plate umpire will have an earpiece that someone in a booth up top, like in the hierarchy of the stadium, will be relaying the calls that the robot strike zone makes, and it'll go to the umpire's earpiece, and then the umpire makes the call.
I think, as sports develop, and I agree with the fact that as we gain technology, we should be implementing into sports, but you can't mess with the intricacy of the game and the essence of the game. And so much of baseball, going back to the 1800s, has been umpires, has been strikes and balls and catchers presenting it to the umpire. That's such a huge part of the game. That's such a huge part of a catcher's role. That's such a huge part of the umpire's role. And by using this technology to basically make an umpire obsolete and diminish the role of the catcher, I mean, that really just messed with the essence of the game.
Yeah, I agree with Daniel here. I'm a huge baseball fan. I have been for a long time. And I think making an automated strike zone wouldn't ruin the game, but it would make it a lot less enjoyable because it's just like the bad calls and the human error is such a huge part and essential to the game.
I guess the one thing I will say is I do think it could lose some excitement from the game for a viewer, right? Because a huge part of the viewer is if a ball is right on the edge, it's that moment of anticipation. Is this a strike? Is this a ball? With the automated strike zone, there isn't necessarily that moment of anticipation because you know for sure this is the zone. This is what it is. So it does take away that aspect.
But this is not like just 2 examples here. One example involving tennis and football. For football, look what technology did with the review for the PI. It just made things so much more convoluted. And I think the strike zone automated strike zone could have that effect. Also for tennis, it's not like tennis where this is back to the human error aspect of the argument, where in tennis you have instant replay if it's slightly in. So if it barely touches the line, then it's in. But with baseball, what's a strike and what's a ball? It's an arbitrary thing that says you should be able to hit the ball here.
But I think the whole point is it takes it out of being an arbitrary thing and makes it into a concrete.
But give me a second. Wait, guys, give me a second. If in the rules of baseball is initially established, and when you learn as a kid, the strike zone is roughly knee to shoulder, right? That's what people say is the correct thing about hitting. Well, what about a strike that's called that barely graces the knee? Is that even real? Is that even really should be a strike? That's where I think judgment should be involved more, because if it's barely gracing the knee, most of the ball is out of the strike zone. Is that a strike or not? That's where human error comes into play. That's where human can tell. And as it is, the MLB refs are the best in the game. Yes, everyone makes mistakes. I think but they are the best in the game. I think people tend to forget that.
I agree. I just still think if you could have perfection, why wouldn't you? And the thing I'd like to respond to about the NFL PA calls is that, or PI calls and pass interference, is that the problem with that isn't so much instant replay, but the rule, right? There's not always a set rule what is or what isn't PI. So that very much depends on the game, and with a different ref at a different time, they can call it differently. So that's part of why that is very much a problem. But there isn't necessarily a set thing. Okay, if this happens, this is always PI.
Yeah, I think the pass interference calls in the NFL just heighten refs' discretion, right? But this would take out refs' discretion at all. So it's not really, it's comparing apples to oranges, really, because it's not convoluted anymore. It's clearly a defined set by parameters that the artificial intelligence or whatnot sets, depending on players' height. And it clearly sets what the correct parameters for a strike or ball. The PI calls are still refs' discretion. This would take human error out of it completely, and I don't see the problem with that.
Well, it comes down to whether you want perfection or whether you want some authenticity in the game. And I personally, look, umpires can make mistakes, right? But that's part of their job. We accept that. But think about an umpire, right? When there's a call on the black that's a strike and they get the call right, we say, oh, great pitch by the pitcher. When there's a ball that just misses the black and it's called a ball, we say, oh, great take by the batter. We never give credit to the umpire. And look, it goes back to what I was saying about how good the umpires are at their job. And by doing this, you're taking out the role of an umpire, and for a minuscule difference, maybe one or two calls a game that are clearly wrong.
Yeah, I think Fox is right.
Why
here.
not eliminate those one or two calls?
Because I think perfection is something that doesn't necessarily need to be achieved in the game to make it better.
I don't think it's
all athletes are trying to achieve perfection. I think if we had perfection in terms of really determining the arbitrary rules of the game, I don't see the problem.
And I still think there's still human error. Just the human error is, as I think it probably should be, mainly from the players, right? Like there still could be like a pop fly that you drop. Like that's still a human error that affects the game. Every time someone gets a strike or hits a ball, that's because the pitcher had human error and messed up the pitch or got it right. So there still is human error. Just the human error doesn't have to be with the rules.
But consider the strike zone is an arbitrary thing some people made when they're making the rules of the game. So then the calls, I believe, should be arbitrary.
But they're taking out the arbitrary is what they're doing, right? So
but I don't think that's a good thing.
Also, let me say this. If a pitch, let's say a catcher is set up down away, right? And the pitcher misses his spot completely, but it's still technically in the strike zone on the other side of the plate. The robot will call it a strike. An umpire will never call that a strike because they will not reward the pitcher for missing his spot so badly with a strike. But a robot will. So that's sort of the little things that sort of bother me about having a automated strike zone.
I think, a robot will, but I guess I feel like that's true. But if you hit the strike zone, should it not be a strike, even if it's not where you intended to throw it? It's the same thing in a lot of sports, right? Like with basketball, even if it's a bad shot, if you make the shot, you still get the points.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Jeremy. I kind of wanted to move on to more baseball-centric people, that being Jacob and Daniel. do you think any teams or specific pitchers would benefit from a rule change and any would, be less? Sorry,
Well,
would come out less at all from the changes? I think it's actually an interesting point to think of.
I mean, it all comes down to the type of pitcher you are and the type of catcher you are. Pitchers who won't benefit are the guys who depend on called strikes, balls just around the zone, hitting the spot and having your catcher just move it an inch and get the call. That's going to be tough when you can't get those stolen strikes because if you got an automated strike zone. And it depends on what your catcher is. If you have a guy like Wilson Contreras, who's a great hitter, but he can't frame, he's going to be a lot more valuable. And a guy like, and there's a guy like Jeff. Yeah, well, Yadier Molina can hit. I was going to say Jeff Mathis. Game is framing, and he has no offensive value. There's a lot of those catchers around the league. They're going to become basically obsolete because their value's gone with an automated strike zone.
I don't think that's a good thing. I like the game. I like the catcher where it is today, as Fox was saying. Like with framing is still an important thing you have to do. And I think when chasing down perfection, you have to be careful.
And also, I know this.
Kasdan.
Fox, put my hand up like this and we talk. Yeah, you got it.
Oh, sorry.
We're good. Yeah, I do agree with both Ellis and Fox on this one. Just a question for you guys. Do you think if they were to implement the automated strike zone, would they have a universal strike zone for every batter, or do you think they would make each batter have their own strike zone?
I think you have to go. Each batter has an individual strike zone, and that's where I think some elements of artificial intelligence or specific calibrations to the individual player, which might take some more effort. So, like in the beginning of the season, every player has his own strike zone calibrated for him. So you can kind of put that in the file, and I think that kind of creates a uniformity that we're kind of looking for when chasing this kind of perfection.
Actually, can I just say that they already have that? Like, if you watch a game where they have the strike zone on TV, like, it's obviously not the same if you have Jose Altuve up there and Aaron Judge. Like, they already have the technology to have every hitter have their own individual strike zone.
Yeah, so why not? If we already have the technology, it's not going to be such a leap, I think some minor leagues have already started implementing it to some capacity, right?
Yeah. But
I guess if I could go back to something for a second about it moving away from the role of the catchers, what I would say is I think that's a very natural part of sports, right? Like if you look at the NFL, as rules change or times change, certain players get better for the times certain players get worse, right? Like look at receivers versus cornerbacks. In the past, a quarterback could be really strong, just jam a receiver on the line. As there's become with time, that has become less and less legal. Cornerbacks need to be faster and need to adjust how they play.
I think, Jeremy, a more appropriate analogy would be the fullback. The catcher is kind of like the fullback. Super utility back then, had a huge impact on the game. But as modernity evolved and new technology showed that passing is more important, I think the catcher might become the fullback, and instead, he's going to become kind of like a second designated hitter position instead of someone that really needs to work. Because I agree, there's so much skill and work that is involved in framing and catching stealers on second base. But as stolen bases become less prevalent and framing becomes less of an issue, if the automated strike zone is really implemented to such a capacity, I think it could be a serious thing that we see it's just a second designated hitter instead of a catcher.
I mean, I don't necessarily think that's a problem though. Like, right, I don't feel like we miss fullbacks.
And I completely agree. We don't have a problem with fullbacks leaving, so it's just kind of a natural evolution of the game.
But catchers they're like I said, they're the most important right now defensive position, maybe besides goalie, in sports. And we're just going to take it away, not even because of a shift in the game, but just because we have the technology to take their job or their main role away.
And I think that's a natural evolution. I don't think there's anything wrong. We don't long for the good old days. We say, let's take away the 3-point line because it's getting overused now. It's kind of a moot point. I think it's super important to kind of let the game evolve.
I don't know. The game evolves naturally. I don't know if this is a natural.
Yeah, not with technology. Yeah.
The game,
I disagree. The
3-point line is a
3-point
technological
revolution happened strictly because of analytics. It's not, and that was
Yeah.
directly is a result of technology. So if we can implement those analytics and make it a more perfect game, I don't see the problem with that.
This is not analytics.
The analytics are yeah.
What Fox go Fox?
The analytics aren't. Oh, sorry. The analytics aren't telling you to take a catcher's role away or to get rid of the importance of framing. It's just because you have the technology for perfection. It's sort of a false equivalency that you're making between the 3-point line, which was all about efficiency. Well, I guess you have a point there when you're talking about efficiency.
Yeah, because it becomes more efficient. The game becomes more efficient because efficiency is ultimately less error. So if we take out human error, add in efficiency, I think that it is somewhat equivalent at least.
But I think the one thing about you have to think about with the catcher too is that, which I kind of would like to harm what Daniel said, is catcher is a lot more important than a lot of the positions. Like going back to the fullback, and yes, this is more efficiency, but framing is a huge part of the game. It isn't like a small thing you're taking out.
I completely agree, Jeremy, but I think that, as the game evolves and framing becomes less important of a skill, it's kind of like the fullback. If you needed really a lot of power and instead of some speed on the football field, it's just a natural evolution. I agree it's a super important trait, but it can become less important as technology evolves and efficiency becomes more important.
I guess I'm almost just even thinking of screen time, right? Like when you're watching a baseball game, unless there's a hit, which in odds, obviously, if you're getting a hit to not getting a hit, there's much more no hits than hits. The amount of time you see the catcher versus almost any other player outside of batters or a pitcher is incredibly high. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because what that means is you see what the catcher's doing so much more, which if he's doing nothing would make the game less exciting.
I'm not sure if that you can really make that comparison. I think that the game can be exciting with or without a catcher because, as you said, it's not necessarily about the catcher. It's about the pitcher and the hitter. It's not necessarily about the frame, which isn't that's not what we're looking for in the excitement of a game. You know how I feel about baseball with it not being very exciting anyway. But I think that the most exciting parts of baseball are amazing defensive plays, which aren't going to be impacted. I think hits are always exciting, which aren't going to be impacted. And I think good pitching is also very good to watch. And I don't think that's going to be impacted at all. I don't look for framing in the game. I know those baseball esoterics like Daniel and Jacob might really appreciate that, but I think to the average layman, it might not be as important of a skill.
Yeah, well, it is, though. Like a layman as you, who never played baseball, and not to call you out here, but who have never really appreciated the art form of a catcher and an umpire and how important a good framing catcher is to a pitcher. I mean, that's such a huge part. You talk about great pitching performances.
Daniel, I completely agree. It is. I never said it's not an important part of the sport. I'm just saying that to the average baseball watcher, it's not what we're looking for in the game. So as sports cater to people and not to the athletes, because that's what sports are fundamentally about, at least on a competitive national level, it's about entertainment. It's not about, it's not necessarily about winning. It's more about entertainment to some capacity. I think that this won't impact the MLB ratings. And actually, MLB might get a boost of ratings from this because yes, the baseball purists you're going to get a bit of backlash on, but this thing, the evolution part, was going to be super interesting and might attract a lot of people that otherwise just wouldn't have been interested.
I guess if I could respond quickly to that, I don't think it's so easy to just kind of get rid of and dismiss baseball purists because baseball is very different than like the NBA or the NFL, right? Because baseball's been around for over 100 years. A huge part of baseball is that, right, it's America's pastime. It's a traditional sport we've always watched. And the reason I mention that is because like basketball, football, they're very much known to a large part for innovation, for changing the game. baseball is known for being a more traditional sport that kind of sticks more to its roots in the way things have been.
And I will provide a counterpoint to that, which is the amount of home runs and juice balls that are currently implemented in the game.
Well,
This is not a purist era. This is an era for change.
Yeah, I
And
don't
even
think-
baseball people can admit that the game has become so much more centric on power, shifts, and home runs instead of the olds of small hits and steals.
I
Yeah, but
agree with
that's-
Ori. Fox. I agree with Ori on that point, where I think there is definitely need for change. I think part of the reason why you see the NBA overtaking the MLB is because they have adapted social media wise and a bunch of other ways wise so much better than the MLB.
Well,
That
I
said,
think that's also a personality
on that
thing.
Said,
That's
on
also
that-
a personality thing. The NBA superstars have so much more weight and have so
That's
much
true.
of a different caliber
Well, give
than
me a
the
second. On that said, I don't think the change you want is an automated strike zone. That's a personal
then
opinion.
Ellis, if you were the commissioner of the MLB, Commissioner Gordon,
Hey, sounds
what
nice.
what would you implement and would you implement this kind of change?
What do you mean? Sorry.
Would
Explain
you
what kind of
implement it automated strike zones?
No,
And if
I would
not,
not.
what would you implement?
Well, that's a weighted question. I would not implement automated strike zones. I don't know. I'm honestly not sure what I would implement. I haven't thought of it like that, but I just
So I
don't-
think I agree with you, but I think the commissioner of the MLB feels exactly the same. He doesn't know what to implement either.
I actually have
Because
an
baseball ratings have been going down over the past few years.
Well,
Most
yeah,
of the
ratings
fans
up,
are
I
currently
think,
going to the NBA.
because here's the reason why. Because they haven't ever had good PR with social. They haven't hopped on the social media highlight trend.
And I agree.
in
I
any way
think
near
this
the
is
NBA. That's what I
why
would do.
this
I would get on social
campaign,
media.
this campaign for an automated strike zone, it would bring some boost to a very much needed industry. Daniel, I
Yeah.
see you wanted to kind of
Yeah,
comment on that.
or look, there is a problem with baseball, but the problem isn't with the umpires. It's a problem with the speed of the game. And well, I guess I said before, implementing this would actually slow the game down. Barely, but it would. Like, so this isn't the problem that needs to be tackled with baseball. If there were some rules, like if I was commissioner, if there were some rules to be changed, it would be things that would speed up the game, like, not having batters step out, or, a certain amount of times the pitcher could throw over, or they already talked about mound visits, but you could go even further with catcher visits. So those are all the things that I would look to see, and that would speed up the game. When you were talking about the umpires and the automatic strike zone, that would bring fans to the game. I actually disagree with you. I don't think anybody would be able to even tell that there's an automatic strike zone, except unless you're watching really closely at the catcher. So I don't really understand.
It's definitely for the TV viewers. That's for sure. Which, in fairness, is a large
why?
constituent. Which is a large constituent of viewers, our TV viewers. So that's fair. But
yeah.
But how would it change the way it's shown on TV? The catcher's still catching the ball. The umpire is still making the call. It wouldn't really change anything. I don't think you'd even notice, except for maybe a few calls a game, where, or unless you watch it over and over and see that no calls are being missed. I don't think in a vacuum of a couple pitches you'd be able to tell a difference.
Yeah. I actually would like to maybe pivot to something. So I had an idea I was thinking of that I think could make the game more exciting. 'Cause I think we all kind of agree that's kind of what baseball's need to make it go faster is. And I know baseball is partly known for its really long season of, I believe it's 160 something games.
Yeah, 162.
So how would you guys, I think a really good way to make it more exciting would be to like maybe half the number of games, to only 81 games. I think like what makes the NFL so exciting and what makes that, I think, the king of ratings largely is urgency, right? Every game matters.
yeah, so this is where I think baseball runs into a bit of a fault. And this is why I think ratings have gone down. And this is I'm going to go a little off topic, but I think that's okay. I think the problem is we get into social media and a technological world, which is, and this is actually, I know I'm contradicting myself. This is probably going to support Ori's point a little more, but I still want to say it, which is a very fast-paced world. And I think a lot of people are losing that lust because even in the NBA, the middle of the season and the beginning of the season, who honestly follows it except diehard NBA fans? If you're a diehard NBA fan like Jacob, I get it. But the average fan comes in after the Super Bowl. There are studies done. You could look it up. The average fan goes into after the Super Bowl. And that's the slight unfixable problem with baseball. The thing about make baseball great, the long games, the stats, the long season is what people are falling out of love with. And I think there'll always be, I think what baseball has to realize is, one, get their social media presence up. Their social media presence is awful. It'll get people up. But two, as we see from Jacob, Fox, and me here, there's a certain constituent that doesn't care that's long games, that they're long games and long seasons. Perfectly, I think that's a great part of baseball. I know a lot of people disagree with me, but I think it's great. And I know Fox and Kazim will have a different opinion, but I think it's great that I can tune into the first and third endings of the game and the sixth and ninth endings of a game, or I can tune into games 2, 10, and 20 and look at the standings, and I don't have to tune into every game like I do about football. I think there's a constituent that really likes that, but baseball shouldn't try to be what they're not. With social media, everyone wants their information like snapping, like quick. Baseball's not that, but I think in time there'll be a large chunk of people that will appreciate it like they do. And the difference is soccer, another long game where people which it kind of bucks the trend, because in Europe soccer is super popular, but it's not like super fast, super quick. Social media teams better, culture's better. That's what baseball has to fix. Social media, culture.
I guess what I'd also argue about soccer is that, but in a soccer, it matters if you win one game matters. Like I feel like that's what I mean when I say urgency about baseball. It isn't even so much only one game, because right, like think about baseball. There's almost nothing more exciting, in my opinion, than playoff baseball, just because of the intensity, right? So if the idea is, how do you make one regular season game matter?
But
right?
I think, Jeremy, the point that playoff baseball matters so much because of the regular season. It's because you've worked 162 games and done all the training and gone through countless hours to play this one game. That's why it matters. I think it would lose some of its allure if it was just, a playoff format right from the beginning of the season kind of thing.
I'd kind of disagree if you have to see things, because look at the NFL, look at basketball, playoffs super exciting there too, because it's not like the players would be working less, it's just less games actively on television. It's still a very long season. It's still, the players are working countless hours, devoting their lives to winning this championship, right? It's just, in one, there's just less games to decide.
But here's the difference. The NFL physically could not have a 160-game season. The NBA could not have a 160-game season. Baseball can. That's just how it is. It's not as physically demanding on your body. And one of the things I like about baseball as a baseball fan is the fact that if you lose a game, you don't have to wait a week or 3 days for another game. You just, next day, new game. And I wanted to bring back up one point that Ellis said, which is about stats. Not only both in a historical and sort of value context. In a historical context, but the numbers in baseball are as famous as any sport. We know that the record, or some people know, that the record for home runs is 73, or the record for hits in a season is 262, or the record for strikeouts in a season is 383. Like, the numbers in baseball, because there's been 162 games for 100 years, and 162 games for 100 years, and the game hasn't really changed that much. We could look at the numbers and compare them from era to era. That's what's great about the historical numbers. And when you talk about value, we place a certain value on 30 home run hitters, on 20 game winners, on 200 strikeouts. So to change that would be sort of changing the value of how we look at players.
Yeah. Regarding the shorter season that Jeremy said they could possibly implement, I would hate that. Like, yeah, I love watching baseball, and yeah, I do sit down, and if a game is on, I will just watch the whole game, even if it ends at 1 a.m. when the Yankees play in LA. But like, as Daniel said, the stats that Ellis said, just like it takes away comparing the different generations from now to the 1980s or 1970s. And I feel like the longer season, it's just like it allows for more player error, and it shows like which teams have built a good front office by like withstanding through those bad injuries that the teams have, or when their star player is out for 80 games and they can still win 100 plus games. I just feel like the longer season is such a huge part of baseball, and they can't remove that.
Also, if I could just make one more quick point. In baseball, I feel like, there's so much there's such a little margin for error between a win and a loss. In football, if the Patriots, let's just say last year, played the Dolphins, well, that's not a good example because the Dolphins beat them, but if the Patriots played the Lions, the Patriots would always win.
Yeah.
Or 99 times out of 100, they would win, because football, it's about game planning, it's about the talent, that's the disparity. But baseball is such a game of inches that the worst team in baseball could beat the best team in baseball any given. So that's why you need to have a 162 game season to really stretch and let the game play itself out.
I guess I kind of see that. I guess I kind of see that actually in the opposite light. I think that is what would make a 81 game season more exciting, is that anyone can beat anyone, right? Because I know one of the big things that the NFL was really good at marketing is hope. The idea that since it's such a small season, a team that you think's not going to be so good, like
the Jets.
Well, the Jets just aren't going to be so good. But right, like the Bills last year, they can get a few good wins and then they can make the playoffs. So I feel like the fact that anyone could beat anyone is better because that sells hope for them. MLB, right? Because it makes there be a chance that a team that's not so good can make the playoffs, which will make its fans more engaged.
I think Jeremy, that comes from a fundamental difference in the attitudes of baseball and football fans. Is that in baseball, you value consistency more than heroic performances in most cases, unless you're in the playoffs. But you want to have a consistent, good season. Well, in football, one or two plays make the whole difference. So I think it's looking at the game differently. Baseball fans would rather have a consistently good season rather than a very tumultuous and capricious season where it just goes up and down, like the Bills, which no one expected. I think there's a certain comfort in expectancy that baseball fans do enjoy.
Well, let me ask Jeremy this. He said there's hope for bad teams to make the playoffs. As a sports fan, do you want bad teams to make the playoffs? If you have an 81-game baseball season because of the fluctuation in the margin of error of baseball game, you will get mediocre teams making the playoffs. The only way to have the best teams make the playoffs is to have a season 162 games long.
Jeremy, I think you see the fundamental difference. You'd see it as a story of hope. When a bad team makes a playoff, but a baseball fan like Daniel might see it as unfair or unjustified. I know Jacob was pissed off that the Rays were doing well last year because apparently
no, that was me.
Oh, well, you as well. Both of you.
I was more mad.
Yes,
because you were upset because they were doing well. But you see, Jeremy and I would argue that we don't want a team that's bad to do bad. We actually find it more exciting if a team that's bad does well. So I think that's just a difference of opinion. But hardcore baseball fans, I think, want to see the best teams play the best teams, not an excitement.
Does that not make you
I think though what my point was earlier is you can have the two worlds can coexist. I know this has devolved a little bit from the original automated strike zone, but you can have baseball fans and football fans coexist. I appreciate the underdog and quick mentality of football, the highlight plays. I also appreciate the long, almost slog of baseball and the beauty of that. I think those things can coexist. And I think baseball should embrace what it is and run from there. NBA embraced what it is. There's change, but you should change, but don't change who you are. And you know what? This is just a lesson for every sports organization and every person out there, just in general. You should change. It is every right for anyone, any organization, any company, any person should change in their life. It shows growth. It shows development. You shouldn't be the same as you are when you're 10 or 20. That said, there are some fundamental principles you will always carry that you should not change who you are. Baseball's that.
All right. After a great discussion, we kind of wanted to just disperse it with a little bit of wacky sport of the week. Ellis, take it over.
Okay, for a wacky sport of the week, drum roll, please. Our wacky sport of the week is Bota Oshi. It is a sport that is pretty much only played in Japan, for as I know. And think of this as kind of like a hybrid of capture the flag, and you'll be explained in a second. So Bota Oshi in Japanese means to bring pull down. That is the translation, and it's played with 150 people, 75 on offense, 75 on defense. You better start finding some friends for this game. So the defenders defend a huge pull, and the attackers without getting tagged have to climb up the pole and then grab it and run. So you have pole supports and barriers to protect the poles. It's kind of like ultra cops and robbers. You have different roles, and you have a ninja. And that ninja is the one person. The goal of the game is to climb up on top of the other opponent's poles in a certain time period, but there's only one person that can climb the pole, and you don't know that person. So the older 74 people have to protect that one person while also hiding who it is, so they can have the element of surprise. Yeah, so there's a bunch of positions. You could look it up on yourself. Really sounds like a really fun game. And so let's talk some tactics here. You know, how do you tactic? That's not even in the sentence, but how best to get up this pole? Punching, kicking, and clawing your way to the top. That's humans. Yes, this is a violent sport. Move away football with your brain diseases and concussions. We got someone that'll leave you in the hospital.
I really have no clue how we're gonna portray us doing this. There are some very, very funny YouTube videos of professional.
Yeah. So once you climb the pole, you lower the. So once you climb the pole, you lower the pole, and then you win. Yeah, that's pretty much our wacky sport of the week. And now let's end it as per usual. Thank you, Dan Fox, for coming on the podcast and talking some baseball. Check out our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Deezer, Buzzsprout, pretty much wherever you get the podcast. I did lie last week. It's still not up on Google Podcasts. Quarantine laziness has hit me hard. Also, YouTube, thanks to Jeremy, that will be up as well. So thank you for that. On another thing is subscribe to our Instagram at watt.podcast or our Twitter at wattpodcast1. We at our Instagram, we're definitely a little more active on Instagram. We're trying to get active on Twitter, but our Instagram has we got some good Photoshop, some funny posts you want to interact with. Leave some comments. Again, as always, thank you for listening. Stay safe. Have a good week. Thank you for listening. Bye.